This might sound hard to believe, but did you know that Pepe, no, not that Pepe, this Pepe's real name is Kepler Laveran de Lima Ferreira? For some of you, it might sound a bit familiar. That's because he's actually named after Johannes Kepler, who invented the first powerful telescope and discovered 3 laws of planetary motion, and Charles Louis Alphonse Laveran, a Nobel Prize-winning French physiologist who uncovered the causes of diseases like malaria, because Pepe's parents were actually quite the scholars and loved to read. In fact, when Pepe was born, his father would say, "With a name like that, my boy is going to become a scientist." And well, perhaps in a certain way, they weren't wrong, because Pepe would grow up to be a master at physics. On the pitch, he was almost like an immovable object, and quickly became infamous and hated by opposition fans throughout the world as one of, if not the most aggressive and unhinged defenders of all time. Despite growing up with his parents' hopes of making a name for himself in the scientific community and even being named after a Nobel Prize winner, there are a lot of people out there that would rather define him as a Nobel idiot, at times looking like unfiltered chaos. And I know that many people will also say that Sergio Ramos is an equally unhinged and aggressive defender himself. But Pepe, without a doubt, would play a huge part in that as an influence. But by his reputation and look alone, you might have never guessed that Pepe was actually the kind of guy who you can consider as a mama's boy. It might be hard to believe and maybe even highly unusual, but Pepe slept in his parents' bed until he was 17. He grew up with 3 sisters and was incredibly spoiled by his mother, which I'm no psychologist, but is what many suggest attributes to the overly masculine and aggressive defensive display on the pitch. Because Pepe has always been that kind of defender ever since he started his career in Brazil. Yeah, that's right. Pepe isn't even from Portugal. As early as 8 years old, the only thing that Pepe enjoyed more than books was football. And nothing in football made him more angry than losing the ball. In his father's words, he would take the ball off of his opponent's legs without minding the damage it would cause. Outside the pitch, he was a relatively calm boy. But when he laced up his boots, it's like he became a completely different person. Because in a friendly match against Portuguese Premier League side Marítimo, the young Pepe was asked to go easy on the opposing strikers. And you guessed it, he didn't. But Marítimo would instead find interest in the aggressive defender and decided to bring him to play in Portugal. And when he arrived in the Primeira Liga, the young and unhinged defender would start to make waves. Pepe was a character that the Portuguese league was definitely not used to seeing. A defender who not only intimidated his opposition with his physical presence, but also through sheer ability. His former manager described him saying, "I remember games in which he was the only real center back. He was only a kid, but he was able to lead the defense all on his own." From that point, I never doubted that Pepe would go far. From what was seen as a league that played traditional defense, Pepe's presence would be a breath, or should I say tackle, of fresh air. He was something new and something special. And that's kind of the reason why I'm so glad I switched to Opera as my new main browser. Without a doubt, my absolute favorite feature with Opera is how I can connect my social media and keep up to date with everything, all with the press of a single button. And while I'm working, I'm able to connect my music to Opera or watch videos with their pop-up player feature to access everything without having to keep track of all these different windows on my screen. Opera also introduced a new way to stay organized with their workspaces and tab islands, saving space by collapsing different groups of tabs together, which has been insanely useful in helping keep my browser clean when I'm doing research for videos or just multitasking with different websites. And to make things even better, Opera's powerful browser AI, Area, helps give me clear answers, information, and ideas, all easily accessible through the sidebar. But if you think it ends there, Opera also has a built-in VPN and ad blocker, keeping your information private, all built into the browser without any extensions needed. So if you want to experience Opera yourself, click the link in the description below to download Opera and change your browsing experience today. But it wasn't until Pepe moved to a bigger Premier League side in Porto that he would really start to be in the spotlight. Pepe was given the immense task of filling in the defensive presence of their Champions League winning center back, Ricardo Carvalho, who alongside the club's former manager Jose Mourinho would be on their way to Chelsea. Despite Porto playing an incredibly offensive 3-4-3 formation, meaning there were really only 3 players in the back line, Pepe was incredibly solid as their main stopper. And as unpopular as this formation was, Pepe's defensive ability was good enough to support Porto to win back-to-back Premier League titles in the 2005-06 and 2006-07 season. And by this time, Pepe was already seen as one of the most technically sound defenders in the world. And that's when Real Madrid and their blank checkbook came calling. For a transfer fee of 30 million euros, Los Blancos would give him a task that was perhaps even more difficult than the one given to him when he joined Porto. He had to help revive a declining defensive presence for Madrid, and was expected to fill the boots of longtime Real Madrid captain and Spanish defensive legend Fernando Hierro, who departed the club a few years ago, yet was still really the last true center back they had. Real Madrid at the time was described as a graveyard for center backs, as many of their defenders around that time were incredibly forgettable. Raul Bravo and Jonathan Woodgate weren't all that notable, and their best center back was Fabio Cannavaro, who was already undersized and was rapidly declining physically after really sacrificing his body for the 2006 World Cup. Even Roberto Carlos and Salgado, who played on the flanks, were on their last legs and already much older, with the only young defensive talent they really had Marcelo and Sergio Ramos, who was still playing as a right back at the time. Pepe even recalls what it was like to play for Madrid in his first year, saying, "We were always one-on-one at the back. I once turned to Fabio Cannavaro and said, 'Fabio, you cover.' And he told me, 'No, it's every man for himself here.'" It's almost a miracle how dysfunctional their defense was, yet Madrid still managed to end the season as champions during Pepe's first year. In fact, during his first El Clasico against Barca, Pepe did such a good job marking Ronaldinho to help Madrid win 1-0 that he would be named the man of the match, with the press going up to him after the match and saying, "Well done. You changed your life today." And former Real Madrid player Miguel Torres would say, "It was hard for any player who came in to reach Fernando Hierro's level. But I thought Pepe was one of the best signings of that period. It didn't take him long to prove that the club had got it right." Objectively speaking, Pepe was an incredibly good defender. But since April 21, 2009, many people would mostly ignore his ability on the pitch and instead see Pepe in a much different light when he infamously kicked Getafe defender Javier Cosquero multiple times and proceeded to punch another. Sure, Pepe had his aggressive moments prior, but nothing was as high profile as that. It was almost like Pepe reached a whole nother level of aggression. After the match, he would go on to apologize for his actions, saying, "I've seen the replays and I don't even recognize myself. I don't have the words to describe how I feel. The biggest punishment that I could receive is what I'm feeling now." And Real Madrid would require him to do some anger management counseling, as Pepe would be hit with a 10-match ban. But that was far from the end of Pepe's infamous reputation. Of course, other high-profile incidents, especially during his time with Madrid, would only continue to garner hatred everywhere from opposition fans. The time he stepped on Messi's foot, a large portfolio of highly aggressive fouls, and generally causing fear from opponents for their safety anytime he was near them, with many other La Liga players admitting they never wanted to be near him. And throughout the years, well, his public image never really recovered. Prime buzzcut Pepe was truly a menace on the pitch, and despite being an absolute warrior who fought till the last second, with an unwavering work rate and world-class defensive ability, when most people look back at his career, they only see Pepe as an out-of-control and raging footballer. Because of his reputation, many seem to forget his importance to both Real Madrid winning their first few Champions League titles in the 2010s and helping Portugal win their only international trophy in history as the 2016 Euros final man of the match. But in Pepe's eyes, his on-pitch playstyle is nothing he should be apologizing for. As he said, "When I go in for a challenge, I don't wait for my opponents. My objective is to win the ball. If my opponent makes contact with me, that's not my problem." Throughout his 10 seasons with Real Madrid, Pepe would win 3 La Liga titles, 2 Copa del Reys, and 3 Champions League titles. But after his days at Real Madrid, Pepe would largely be out of the spotlight. But Sergio Ramos would definitely take the baton, and continue to carry out that unhinged legacy. And despite being older and no longer playing for the world's most high-profile club, Pepe would still continue to be a quality defender. Funnily enough, he did get a little less unhinged, but of course, at times bring out that inner menace. But the reason why he's still able to play at one of the highest levels, even up until today, is because outside the pitch, Pepe is one of the most hardworking and disciplined footballers of the game, still keeping an insanely healthy diet and exercise routine that would help him continue to play for Porto and Portugal well into the age of 40. But for these last couple of years, Pepe has kind of actually slightly turned his reputation around. The only problem is, not a lot of people actually realized it, and it just goes to highlight how his defensive ability was really overlooked and undermined just because of his past mistakes and overly aggressive moments. But yes, that definitely is due to his personal decisions. But if nothing else, in Pepe's career, especially in his prime, you either absolutely hated him or love and respected his warrior-like attitude on the pitch. I actually asked a poll to see who was the bigger menace between him and Ramos. And well, at the very least, a lot of people are saying that Pepe's fouls were out in the open and not hidden. Therefore, he was just aggressive and not really dirty, while a lot of Sergio Ramos's most infamous moments kind of were. Now nearing 42 years old, Pepe is close to the end of his career, but he certainly will always be a player that for many, for better or for worse, will never forget.